The private dining room at the Alderton Hotel seated 40 people, and on the second Friday of every month, it belonged to the Hendersons. Margaret Henderson had booked that room 11 years in a row, first for her husband's company dinners, then, after he retired, for her garden club's quarterly lunches, and now, in what everyone in the hotel's events department quietly called a tradition worth protecting, for her late husband's retirement party, rescheduled twice already, and finally, stubbornly, happening tonight. Remy Donoghue had personally confirmed the reservation 3 times. So when 3 men in black suits walked through the double doors at 6:45 and began moving chairs away from the center table, Remy put down her clipboard, crossed the room, and said, clearly enough for the 14 guests already seated to hear, "The room is booked through 9 o'clock. Whoever these gentlemen are, they're welcome to the bar." Nobody moved. The man nearest the window looked at her the way people sometimes look at a speed bump they hadn't noticed. Irritated, briefly, then calculating whether to go around it. "Mr. Harrow needs the room." Remy looked at the 3 men, then at the guests, then back at the man. "Mr. Harrow needs a reservation." Silence. A 4th man walked in. She noticed 2 things simultaneously. He was the kind of handsome that felt almost unfair, dark-featured, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that clearly cost more than her monthly rent, and he expected the room to rearrange itself around him without being asked, the same way certain men expected elevators to hold. She did not offer to move. "I have a meeting in 40 minutes. His voice was low and very even, the kind of voice that had stopped needing volume some time ago. "And Mrs. Henderson has 11 years of confirmed reservations." Remy held up her clipboard. "I can get you a table in the main dining room, or there's the private bar on the 4th floor. Good Scotch. Quiet!" The man, Mr. Harrow apparently, looked at the clipboard, then at Remy. Something in his expression shifted only slightly. One of his men stepped toward the seated guests. "Everyone needs to clear out." "Stop." Remy moved between them and the tables. She wasn't sure exactly what she planned to do next. She was 5'4", wearing a blazer with a broken button, holding a clipboard like it meant something. But she planted herself there and pointed toward the doors. "This room belongs to these people until 9 o'clock. Anyone without a confirmed booking needs to leave." No one moved. Then, a woman near the kitchen pass-through whispered something to the man beside her. The name traveled around the room, the way a lit match travels. Carefully, by people who understood exactly how quickly it could become something worse. Harrow. Nicholas Harrow. Remy knew it. Most people in Chicago did, at least the version that appeared in newspapers. Harrow Industries, a real estate and logistics firm with its hand in half the city's construction permits. The other version lived in the spaces newspapers were more careful about filling. 3 federal investigations that never produced charges. Business partners who became unavailable, a name that cleared rooms before it was spoken above a murmur. She looked back at the man she had just told to leave. His expression hadn't changed. He was watching her with clinical interest. The way someone looks at a problem they're deciding whether to solve or walk around. Remy swallowed. She held the clipboard a little tighter. Nicholas Harrow looked at the guests, then back at her. "Thursday." "Excuse me. You said I need a reservation?" He straightened his cufflink. "Thursday, 7 o'clock." Remy opened her scheduling binder. Her hands were completely steady, which surprised her. She flipped to Thursday, 7:30. "The room opens at 6 for setup." He nodded once. 7:30. Then he walked out. His men followed. The private dining room went so quiet, Remy could hear the ice settling in someone's water glass. What she didn't know yet was that Nicholas Harrow would not wait until Thursday. At 8 the next morning, Remy was in her 3rd-floor office, A small room beside the event's coordinator's suite, shared with 2 monitors, a filing cabinet, and a spider plant she'd been meaning to repot for 6 months, when someone knocked twice and opened the door without waiting. 2 men entered first, then Harrow. Remy very carefully did not spill her coffee. "Your reservation is Thursday," she said. "I know." He closed the door. "This isn't about the room." He looked at the office, the monitors, the open spreadsheets, the color-coded binders stacked on the corner of her desk, and then looked at her. "You handed me a scheduling binder last night. To show you the Henderson booking was confirmed." Page 14 had a handwritten note, red ink Q3 event revenue, $47,000 variance, source unverified. Remy set down her coffee. "You noticed it," he said, not a question. She had noticed it 3 weeks ago. She had also noticed that the variance matched the pattern of a revenue siphon she'd seen once before at a previous job. Small amounts, consistent, always from the same booking category, always buried in catering invoice rounding. Someone was skimming, not the hotel. Through the hotel, she had flagged it in her own notes and was still deciding who to tell, because telling the wrong person first was considerably worse than waiting. "I noticed it," she said, and said nothing. "I said nothing to you. At the time, I thought you were a man who needed to be shown the door. And now—" Remy looked at the 2 men standing against her filing cabinet. "Now I think you might need your books examined more carefully than your own people are doing." The office went very still. One of the men shifted. Harrow lifted 2 fingers and the man went still again. "How long?" Harrow asked. "Based on what I can see, about 8 months. Possibly longer if it started before Q2. She picked up a pen. "I'd need access to the full event ledger to be certain. And you'd need to decide whether you want this handled quietly or handed to someone with a license to escalate it." Quietly. That costs extra. She wrote a number on a notepad and slid it across the desk. Consultation fee, in advance. Harrow looked at the amount. One of his men made a strangled sound. "You're charging me," he said, "to find out who's stealing from me." "I'm charging you because you walked into my office without an appointment, and I had to stop doing 3 other things." She capped the pen. "The rate goes up if you bring more men next time." For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not warmth. More like recognition of something he hadn't expected. He reached into his jacket. He paid. That should have been the end of it. 2 weeks later, the variance traced back to a mid-level events manager routing commission payments to a shell LLC. Remy prepared a report, sealed it, delivered it, and told herself the matter was concluded. Nicholas Harrow returned the following Tuesday. He sat in the guest chair, the one usually occupied by her rolling cart of receipt binders, and said his logistics company was having trouble reconciling some contractor invoices. Remy looked at him. "You have an entire finance department." "My finance department produced the invoices." She looked at the folder he placed on her desk. She opened it. She spent 4 minutes reviewing it. "The problem's on page 3, she said. "Your contractor is billing at a 2019 rate that expired. Someone renewed the contract without updating the schedule." Harrow looked at the folder. "That's it?" "That's it." He reached for his wallet. "You were here 11 minutes, she said. "The fee's the same." "I'm aware." He paid without argument. "Thursday. I still have the room." "It's in the binder." He left. She sat with the folder for a moment, then filed it under a category she labeled Other, reserved for things that didn't fit anywhere yet. The visits continued. An employment contract. A vendor agreement with ambiguous termination language. A real estate lease that Harrow claimed his attorneys had reviewed, but that he wanted, he said, a second opinion on. Remy reviewed the lease. "Your attorneys are right." "I wanted to be certain." She printed an invoice. He paid. By the fourth visit, she had started moving the rolling cart away from the guest chair before he arrived. She noticed herself doing it. She chose not to examine it closely. Seth Alderman had worked in the Aldertons events department for 6 years and brought Remy a blueberry muffin every Thursday because she'd mentioned, once and in passing, that Thursday mornings were brutal, and blueberries were the only reliable countermeasure. He was easy and tall, and wore his hair slightly long in a way that worked on him, and he'd been finding reasons to stop by her office at least twice a week for 8 months, without ever quite explaining why. He came by on a Wednesday, irregular, carrying her usual coffee order from the lobby cafe. Harrow was in the guest chair. Seth read the room with impressive speed, recovered, smiled, and set the cup on the corner of her desk. "Just dropping this off. I'll catch you later." He was gone before Remy could say anything. Harrow looked at the cup. "How long has he been doing that?" he asked. Remy looked up from the vendor file on her desk. "About 8 months. He knows your order. He's asked about it. He pays attention." Harrow looked at the cup again. Something in his jaw shifted. "What cafe is that?" "The one in the lobby, $4. "I see." He buttoned his jacket. "Invera." She printed it. He paid. He came back on Friday with coffee. Not from the lobby cafe. The cup was from a place called Reverie, which Remy happened to know was across the city, required reservations for weekend brunch, and did not, as far as she was aware, do walk-up takeout, unless one was extremely persuasive or extremely intimidating. She looked at the cup. She looked at Harrow. "This is from Reverie. I'm aware of where it's from. They don't do takeout. They do now." She picked it up, took a sip. It was, objectively, an extraordinary cortado. She set it down. "Seth's coffee costs $4. Mine cost 16. That's not the same thing as knowing my order, isn't it? He brings me a caramel latte with an extra shot." She held up the cup. "You brought me a cortado." Harrow looked at her. "You seem like a cortado person." Remy almost smiled. The effort cost her. "I'm a caramel latte person." He looked briefly like a man who had made a tactical error and was reclassifying it as intelligence gathering. "I'll know that Thursday. There's a fee for today's visit." I assumed. He reached for his wallet. She charged him $50 and did not, under any circumstances, comment on how good the cortado was. When he left, she finished every drop of it. The Alderton hosted a charity gala in November, a fundraiser for the city's arts foundation that pulled in architects, gallery owners, and the particular stratum of wealth that dressed loudly and moved quietly. Remy attended because 3 months earlier she had caught a billing error in the gala's vendor contracts that saved the foundation nearly $30,000. And the foundation's director had insisted, personally, that she come. She arrived alone. Her name was on the guest list under Bennett Accounting Services, the independent practice she ran from her apartment, which had been receiving a quiet stream of referrals from clients she couldn't quite account for. For the first hour it went fine. She answered questions about the billing audit and ate 4 canapes and felt, cautiously, like she was exactly where she'd earned the right to be. Then she met Cassandra Cole. Cassandra consulted for 3 of the city's major hotel groups on branding and social positioning, which meant she spent considerable effort deciding how things looked and whose names appeared next to what. She greeted Harrow warmly, then looked at Remy with the pleasant expression of someone encountering unfamiliar furniture. "And this is Harrow's bookkeeper." "Remy Donahue," Remy said. "I run Bennett Accounting." "Of course," a warm smile. "How wonderful that Nicholas found you." 20 minutes later, Cassandra introduced Remy to a hotel executive as Nicholas's numbers girl. Remy corrected her again. Cassandra's smile didn't change. By the third introduction, to a gallery owner, as the woman who handles Harrow's books, Remy understood exactly what was happening. Nothing openly offensive. Nothing she could object to without appearing oversensitive. Just a careful, consistent reduction. Her name dissolved into a function. Her work became a service she performed for someone more important. Her practice became a detail of his reputation. She was deciding how directly to respond when Cassandra turned to a cluster of executives and said brightly, "There's been talk about formalizing the arrangement, bringing Remy's practice properly into the Harrow Industries structure. Better visibility, real capital behind it." Remy stopped breathing for a moment. The group immediately turned to her. "What a wonderful opportunity. You must be so excited." A woman touched her arm. "Nicholas really takes care of the people he values." Remy looked across the room. Harrow had gone completely still. He was watching Cassandra with the particular quality of stillness she had learned. In 5 weeks of visit after invented visit meant he was deciding something quickly. But Remy spoke first. "Did you authorize this?" Directly to him, across the 4 feet between them. The group went quiet. No one word, no pause. She believed him. She turned back to Cassandra. "My practice isn't for sale." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, and conversations about my business start with me, not with anyone else, regardless of whose event we're standing at. Cassandra's smile tightened fractionally. "I certainly didn't mean to suggest." "Bennett Accounting has 16 clients," Remy said. "I built that practice one engagement at a time. The work that brought me here tonight is on record under my name. That's why I was invited, not because of anyone's association with me." A long silence. Then Harrow moved to stand beside her, not in front, not between her and the group, exactly beside her. "There are no authorized discussions regarding the acquisition or restructuring of Ms. Donahue's practice." His voice was quiet. The room heard it anyway. "No one under my direction has permission to approach her business on my behalf. That's final." He didn't threaten Cassandra. He didn't embarrass her further. He simply removed every possible misunderstanding from the air. A hotel executive attempted to rescue the conversation. Harrow looked at Remy first. Not for permission to speak for her, but for how she wanted to proceed. Something moved between them. Then he turned to the group. "Remy Donahue runs Bennett Accounting. The foundation's contracts came in $30,000 under budget this year because of her work. Nothing more, no qualifier, no possessive, her name, her work." Later, standing near the bar while the crowd reorganized itself, Remy said, "You didn't know what she was going to say." "No. But it happened anyway." She looked at her glass. "In your world, my work becomes a story about who I know. A cup of coffee becomes something people file away. A billing correction becomes a favor you arranged." She set the glass down. "I've spent 3 years making sure people know I'm good at what I do. I can't afford for that to become a footnote." Harrow said nothing. "I'm not angry with you," she said, "but I need some space to figure out how to be around you without becoming something attached to you." He was quiet long enough that she thought he might argue. Then he said, "All right." And that was that. For 2 weeks, Harrow didn't come by. No folders, no invented discrepancies, no invoices printed, no coffee of any price point left on her desk corner. The office felt normal. Quiet, the way it had been before a man in a charcoal suit started occupying her guest chair and paying flat fees for documents he clearly didn't need reviewed. She told herself this was what she'd asked for. She looked at the guest chair 9 times in 2 weeks. She stopped counting after that. On the 3rd Thursday, Seth brought the muffin and then, over coffee, asked if she'd want to have dinner sometime. Not casually. A real question, stated plainly. Remy looked at him. Seth was kind and uncomplicated. Being with him would be easy in all the ways that mattered for ordinary life. No whispers when they walked into a restaurant. No newspaper finding significance in a paper cup. She thought about a man who had walked into a room full of 40 strangers and pulled a number from a dispenser and sat down and waited, not because anyone made him, but because the alternative was leaving. "I need a little time," she told Seth. He smiled. "Take it." 3 days later, Remy's office door opened. Harrow sat in the guest chair. He set a folder on the desk. Remy looked at it. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing." "That's not likely." He opened the folder. She reviewed it. A standard contractor reconciliation. 2 pages, clean as anything she'd ever seen. "There's nothing wrong with this," she said. "I know." She looked up. "You know?" "Yes." "Then why are you here?" He was quiet long enough that she genuinely thought he might not answer. "Then I needed an excuse." The word settled differently than she expected. She looked at the folder, at the man who ran 14 business interests across 2 states and had somehow produced 2 pages of flawless bookkeeping as a pretext to sit in her office. "You manage half the city's logistics infrastructure," she said. "This is the best excuse you could come up with." "Apparently not when it comes to you." Remy closed the folder. "The first time I came back," Harrow said, "it was because you'd found something everyone else had missed or decided not to mention. That was genuinely useful." His voice was quieter. "Now, the lease your attorneys had already reviewed. Partly useful." "The vendor file from 2 Tuesdays ago." He paused. "There was nothing wrong with it before I brought it." She stared at him. "You manufactured a problem. I noted a discrepancy I subsequently resolved before arrival. And brought it anyway." "Yes." She should not have found this funny. She found it completely, helplessly funny. The effort of not showing it was significant. "You have been paying me a consultation fee," she said carefully, "to sit in that chair and watch me review documents you already knew were fine. The rate is fair. That is not the point." "I know what the point is." He looked at her directly. "Nobody in my world tells me when something's wrong. They tell me what looks right. They manage appearances. They smooth things over and call it loyalty." He was quiet for a moment. "You handed me a scheduling binder on the worst possible night, told me to take Thursday, and then sent me an invoice the next morning. You already knew who I was. You did it anyway." Remy said nothing. "I liked being here," he said. "In the beginning, I thought it was because nobody treated me as a problem to manage. Then I realized it was because you didn't manage me at all. You just told me the truth." A pause, including when the truth was inconvenient for both of us. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why didn't you just ask me to dinner?" she said. Nicholas Harrow, who had outlasted 3 federal investigations and negotiated terms with people who had every reason to refuse, did not immediately have an answer. Then he gave her the only honest one he had. "Because I wasn't certain you'd say yes." There it was. Not authority. Not the assumption that wanting something meant receiving it. Just the plain, unguarded admission of uncertainty from a man who had spent most of his adult life in rooms where nobody admitted to being uncertain about anything. He had given her space because she asked for it. He had come back without assuming she owed him anything. He was sitting in her guest chair with a folder of immaculate documents he'd used as a pretext, and he was waiting, the same way he'd waited in that dining room 3 months ago, not because anyone required it of him, but because leaving felt worse than the alternative. Remy looked at the folder. "Dinner?" she said. He watched her carefully. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes." Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, just a fraction of release, like a long-disputed figure that had finally reconciled. She slid the folder back across the desk toward him. Consultation fee still applies. He looked at the folder. For a document you've confirmed has no errors. You made me verify it. A pause. How much? Remy picked up her pen. $50, she said, same as always. Nicholas Harrow reached for his wallet. And that, Remy Donoghue would later decide, was probably the moment she knew they actually had a chance. Not because of what he could do, or what he controlled, or what his name cleared from a room, but because he sat in her guest chair and paid a $50 invoice for a folder he'd manufactured as a pretext, and he did it without a single word of argument. And he looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like a man who understood he'd gotten away with something. Several months later, Bennett Accounting was still operating out of the same third-floor office at the Alderton Hotel. Remy had not relocated, had not rebranded, had not accepted capital she hadn't earned. The practice had grown because word traveled. One foundation audit led to a museum referral, which led to a preservation trust, which led to 4 more clients who had been looking for exactly the kind of precise attention Remy had always been very good at providing. Harrow respected the difference. He didn't offer to accelerate it. They were dating slowly, which was not a word Remy had previously associated with a man who made decisions in 90 seconds and was used to the world catching up to him. He had become, over time, surprisingly capable of it. One afternoon in early spring, he arrived 12 minutes before her last appointment ended. He did not knock on her office door. He sat in the small chair outside in the hallway, not the guest chair inside, which she noticed, and waited without commentary while she finished with a client. When she opened the door, he was still there. "You waited," she said. "You were busy. You could have come back later." "I know." He picked up his jacket from the chair arm. "I didn't want to." There was a version of this, she knew, where it felt like too much. There was another version, the true one, where it was exactly what it was. A man who could make an entire city move for him choosing, on a quiet Tuesday, to simply wait. She held the door open. "Come in, then." He did. Outside the window, Chicago went on doing what it always did. Contracts and permits and the ordinary machinery of a city that moved without knowing or caring who pulled the levers. Inside the office, Remy put the kettle on. Harrow took the guest chair, and nobody rushed anything. No invoice required.